Hi everyone, now you're watching my channel. All the content I create myself, new videos every day, so don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means a lot. Thanks, bye!
Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses. Those words would haunt Officer Martinez for the rest of his life. Judge Keisha Williams approached the courthouse in her civilian clothes, a briefcase containing today's case files. Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in. Martinez blocked her path, sneering down at her with pure contempt. His open palm cracked against her face so hard her head snapped sideways. The expensive briefcase flew from her grip, legal documents scattering like confetti across the courthouse steps. Martinez grabbed her by the throat, slamming her back against the stone wall. Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses. He twisted her arms behind her back, metal handcuffs biting into her wrists. Other officers gathered around, laughing and recording with their phones. Keisha's jaw throbbed, but her eyes stayed locked on the bronze nameplate above the courthouse entrance. The Honorable Judge K. Williams presiding, 20 feet away from her own courtroom, being brutalized by the very system she served. Have you ever seen instant karma this brutal? Inside the courthouse, Martinez straightened his uniform and cleared his throat. He had done this dance many times before: spin the story, control the narrative, make himself the hero. The system always believed cops over criminals, especially when those criminals looked like her. Your Honor, Martinez began, his voice steady and practiced. I was conducting routine security protocols when I encountered a suspicious individual attempting to breach courthouse security. He gestured toward Keisha, now sitting in handcuffs at the defendant's table, a purple bruise blooming across her left cheek. The defendant was acting erratically, refusing to provide identification, and became increasingly agitated when asked to comply with standard security procedures. The temporary judge, Judge Harrison, a pale, thin man in his 60s, nodded approvingly. And what exactly did you observe, Officer Martinez? Well, sir, she was dressed inappropriately for court proceedings, carrying what appeared to be stolen legal documents. Martinez's eyes gleamed as he warmed to his fabrication. When I approached to investigate, she became verbally aggressive, using profanity and making threats. From the gallery, two other officers, Rodriguez and Thompson, exchanged knowing looks. They had heard Martinez tell similar stories dozens of times, different faces, same script. She kept screaming about being someone important, Martinez continued, his voice dripping with disdain. These people always claim to be lawyers, judges, senators, anything to avoid accountability. I've seen this playbook before, Your Honor. Judge Harrison leaned forward, clearly engaged. Did she attempt to flee or resist arrest? Absolutely. The defendant became physically combative when I attempted to place her in protective custody. I was forced to use the minimum necessary force to ensure public safety. Martinez's hand trembled almost imperceptibly as he spoke, the only crack in his polished performance. The courthouse stenographer's fingers flew across her machine, capturing every lie for posterity. In the back row, a young law clerk frowned, something nagging at her memory. Officer Rodriguez, the prosecutor called. Can you corroborate Officer Martinez's testimony? Rodriguez stood, his uniform pressed to perfection. Yes, ma'am. I witnessed the entire incident. The defendant was clearly attempting to circumvent security protocols. Officer Martinez handled the situation with remarkable professionalism. And the alleged assault? Judge Harrison inquired. Martinez's jaw tightened. Your Honor, I used only the force necessary to subdue an aggressive individual who was threatening courthouse security. The defendant's injuries, if any, resulted from her own resistance to lawful commands. He pulled out his phone, swiping to a video that conveniently started mid-confrontation. I have partial footage here, though unfortunately my body cam malfunctioned this morning. The lie rolled off his tongue like honey. How convenient, Keisha murmured, speaking for the first time. "I'm sorry?" Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Nothing, Your Honor," she replied calmly, though her eyes blazed with controlled fury. Martinez continued his performance. "What we're seeing here is a classic case of someone playing the victim card after being caught breaking the law. She was trespassing on government property, carrying suspicious documents, and when confronted with her criminal behavior, she immediately claimed discrimination." The prosecutor, a middle-aged woman named Sandra Walsh, nodded sympathetically. "Officer Martinez, in your 15 years of service, have you encountered similar situations?" "Unfortunately, yes. There's a pattern here. Certain individuals believe they're above the law, that rules don't apply to them. They use accusations of racism to deflect from their own criminal behavior." Martinez's voice rose with righteous indignation. "It's honestly insulting to the real victims of discrimination." Several people in the gallery, mostly white courthouse employees, nodded in agreement. They had heard similar stories on the news, seen similar narratives play out in social media. It felt familiar, comfortable even. "The defendant claims she was going to work," Martinez made air quotes mockingly. "But she couldn't provide any employment verification, any identification, or any legitimate reason for being in a restricted area of the courthouse." Thompson, the third officer, stepped forward. "If I may add, Your Honor, the defendant was carrying what appeared to be confidential legal documents. We suspect she may have been involved in some kind of identity theft or fraud scheme." Judge Harrison looked intrigued. "Fraud scheme?" "Yes, sir." Martinez jumped back in, sensing momentum. "These documents had judicial letterhead, case numbers, and sensitive information. No legitimate citizen would have access to materials like this. We believe she may have been planning to impersonate court personnel." The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating, but Martinez pressed on, oblivious to the trap he was setting for himself. "In my professional opinion," he concluded, "this is simply another case of someone trying to game the system. She knows if she can make this about race, about alleged police brutality, she can distract from her actual crimes. It's a calculated manipulation of public sympathy." He turned to face Keisha directly, his eyes cold and contemptuous. "These people think they can just waltz into any building, any courtroom, any space they choose, and when they're stopped, they scream discrimination. Well, not in my courthouse." The words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Several court staff members shifted uncomfortably while others remained stone-faced. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Walsh added, "the state recommends we proceed with charges of trespassing, resisting arrest, and assault on a police officer. The defendant's attempt to frame this as a civil rights issue is clearly a desperate defense strategy." Martinez allowed himself a small smile. This was going exactly as planned. Another case, another win, another reminder that the system worked the way it was supposed to. People knew their place, or they learned it the hard way. "Furthermore," he continued, emboldened by the supportive atmosphere, "I want to emphasize that I showed remarkable restraint. The defendant was clearly unstable, possibly under the influence of narcotics. A lesser officer might have used much more significant force." Judge Harrison nodded gravely. "Your professionalism is noted, Officer Martinez." In the defendant's chair, Keisha sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap despite the handcuffs. Her expression remained calm, almost serene, but anyone looking closely would have noticed the slight upturn at the corners of her mouth. She was taking mental notes of every lie, every fabrication, every detail that would soon unravel Martinez's career and reputation. The officer had no idea he was testifying in front of the very person who had the power to destroy him. "Is there anything else you'd like to add, officer?" Judge Harrison asked. Martinez straightened his shoulders. "Just that incidents like this remind us why we need strong law enforcement. Some people only understand authority when it's backed by force. The defendant learned today that actions have consequences." He had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. The prosecutor smiled confidently. "The state rests its case against this defendant, Your Honor. The evidence clearly shows a pattern of criminal behavior and resistance to lawful authority. As Martinez stepped down from the witness stand, he caught Keisha's eye one final time. He winked at her, a gesture of complete dominance, total victory. It would be the last moment of triumph in his entire career. "The defendant may now present her statement," Judge Harrison announced, his tone suggesting this would be a mere formality before sentencing. Keisha Williams rose slowly from her chair, the handcuffs clinking softly as she moved. Despite the purple bruise on her cheek and the disheveled state of her clothes, she carried herself with an unmistakable dignity that made several people in the courtroom shift uncomfortably. "Thank you, Your Honor." Her voice was clear, controlled, and carried an authority that seemed to fill the entire room. "I appreciate the opportunity to address these allegations." Judge Harrison blinked. Something in her tone was unexpected, professional in a way that didn't match the narrative he'd been presented. "First, I want to clarify several factual inaccuracies in Officer Martinez's testimony." Keisha's eyes swept the courtroom methodically, landing on each person who had supported the officer's lies. "According to his statement, I was trespassing on government property. However, I was walking on a public sidewalk approaching the main entrance of this courthouse at approximately 8:47 a.m. She turned slightly, addressing Judge Harrison directly. "Your Honor, I'm sure you're familiar with the Supreme Court ruling in Hague v's Committee for Industrial Organization, which clearly establishes that public sidewalks adjacent to government buildings are traditional public forums where citizens have a constitutional right to be present." The stenographer's fingers paused mid-stroke. The prosecutor frowned. This wasn't the rambling, emotional outburst they'd expected from someone facing serious charges. "Furthermore," Keisha continued, "Officer Martinez testified that I was carrying suspicious documents and suggested I was involved in identity theft. I'd like to examine that claim more closely." She gestured toward the evidence table where her scattered papers had been collected. "Those documents are indeed authentic legal materials. Specifically, they include pending case files, judicial memoranda, and administrative correspondence, all of which I have legitimate access to in my professional capacity." "Professional capacity?" Judge Harrison interrupted. "And what exactly is your profession, Miss—" Keisha paused, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Williams. Dr. Williams. And I think we'll get to my professional background shortly, Your Honor." Martinez felt a chill run down his spine. Something was very wrong with this picture. "Your Honor, if I may continue," Keisha said, her voice taking on the cadence of someone completely comfortable in a courtroom setting. "Officer Martinez also testified that I became verbally aggressive and used profanity. I'd like to address that claim by invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent regarding any statements I may have made during the alleged incident." She paused, letting that sink in. "However, I will note that any statements I did make were in direct response to being physically assaulted without provocation, warning, or legal justification." The young law clerk in the back row sat up straighter. Something about this woman's voice, her mannerisms, seemed familiar. "Now, regarding the officer's claim that his body cam malfunctioned," Keisha continued, and now there was steel in her voice. "Your Honor, I'm sure you're aware of the federal rules of evidence, particularly Rule 1006, which allows for the introduction of summaries of voluminous records. I have reason to believe that comprehensive video and audio evidence of this morning's incident exists and will be made available to this court." Judge Harrison leaned forward. "What kind of evidence are you referring to?" "Your Honor, this courthouse has extensive security camera coverage, including high-definition cameras positioned at 15-foot intervals along the main approach. Additionally, the county maintains automatic backup systems for all officer body cam footage, regardless of claimed equipment malfunctions." The color drained from Martinez's face. He had forgotten about the courthouse security cameras in his rush to control the narrative. "I would like to formally request," Keisha continued, that this court issue a preservation order for all electronic surveillance data from this morning between 8:45 and 9:15 a.m., including but not limited to courthouse security footage, body cam backup files, and any mobile phone recordings that may have been made by officers present at the scene. Prosecutor Walsh stood abruptly. Objection, Your Honor. The defendant cannot simply make evidentiary demands without proper legal representation. Keisha turned to face the prosecutor with a look that made the woman take an involuntary step backward. Your Honor, pro se defendants have the constitutional right to present evidence in their own defense under the Sixth Amendment. Additionally, Brady v. Maryland establishes the prosecution's obligation to preserve potentially exculpatory evidence. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. This was not how these cases usually went. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Miss Williams, you seem unusually familiar with legal procedure. Do you have formal legal training? I have some experience with the judicial system, Your Honor. Keisha's response was carefully neutral, but her eyes gleamed with something that looked almost like amusement. She walked, as much as the handcuffs would allow, to the evidence table and gestured toward her scattered belongings. Your Honor, I'd also like to address Officer Martinez's characterization of my presence here as suspicious or unauthorized. She pointed to a specific document among the papers. This is my daily court calendar, which shows I was scheduled to preside over... Excuse me, I was scheduled to appear in this building for legitimate business starting at 9:00 a.m. this morning. The bailiff, a large man named Henderson, who had worked in this courthouse for 12 years, suddenly went very still. He was staring at Keisha with growing recognition and horror. Officer Martinez testified that I claimed to be someone important, Keisha continued. I'd like to clarify that I never made any such claim during our encounter. However, I did attempt to show him my identification, which he refused to examine before initiating his assault. She paused, surveying the courtroom. Your Honor, I have in my possession, despite Officer Martinez's violent interference, documentation that will conclusively establish both my identity and my legitimate reason for being at this courthouse this morning. Judge Harrison was beginning to look distinctly uncomfortable. What kind of documentation? Keisha reached carefully into her jacket pocket, moving slowly to avoid startling anyone. My judicial parking pass, issued by this courthouse's administrative office, my building access card, programmed with my judicial chamber's entry code, and my official identification. The bailiff Henderson suddenly stood up, his face pale as he recognized the woman he'd seen every day for the past 3 years. Your Honor, Keisha said quietly, I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding about who exactly Officer Martinez assaulted this morning. She held up a leather credential wallet, and even from across the room the gold judicial seal was clearly visible. Perhaps we should recess so that proper identifications can be verified, she suggested, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who was used to giving orders in courtrooms, not taking them. Judge Harrison stared at the credential wallet, then at Keisha's face, then at the bailiff who was nodding grimly. Court will recess for 15 minutes, he said hoarsely. As the gavel fell, Martinez felt his world beginning to crumble around him. Whatever game he thought he was playing, he was beginning to realize he might not understand the rules at all. During the 15-minute recess, the courthouse buzzed with nervous energy. In a small holding room adjacent to the courtroom, Keisha sat calmly while Bailiff Henderson fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking as the reality of the situation hit him. Judge Williams, he whispered, his voice thick with horror. Jesus Christ, Judge Williams, I am so sorry. I didn't recognize you in civilian clothes, and when they brought you in like that. It's all right, Henderson, Keisha replied softly. You weren't part of this, but I need you to do something for me. Anything, Your Honor. Anything at all. I need you to go to my chambers, quietly, and bring me my judicial robes, the black ones with the gold trim. And Henderson? She looked him directly in the eye. Bring my gavel, too. The engraved one from my swearing-in ceremony. Henderson nodded vigorously and hurried out, leaving Keisha alone with her thoughts. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, centering herself the way she had learned to do during her 23 years on the bench. This morning, she had been Judge Keisha Williams, respected jurist, protector of constitutional rights, guardian of justice. In the span of 15 minutes, she had been transformed into a victim, a defendant, a woman in handcuffs facing trumped-up charges. But now it was time to reclaim what was hers. Her phone, confiscated during the arrest, but now returned, buzzed with missed calls and messages. Her clerk, Janet Morrison, had sent increasingly frantic texts. "Judge Williams, where are you? The Peterson hearing is in 30 minutes. Your Honor, the attorneys are here asking about delays. Judge Williams, please call me back. There are rumors that something happened." Keisha typed back quickly. "Tell the Peterson attorneys we'll reschedule. Something more important has come up. Clear my afternoon calendar." She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. Chief Judge Margaret Carter, the administrative head of the entire judicial district. "Margaret, it's Keisha." "Keisha, thank God. We heard there was some kind of incident. Are you all right?" "I've been better. Margaret, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it without asking questions right now." "Of course. Whatever you need." "I need you to contact the courthouse security office and tell them to immediately preserve and copy all surveillance footage from this morning between 8:45 and 9:15 a.m. All cameras, all angles. And Margaret, make sure there are multiple copies stored in different locations." There was a pause. "Keisha, what exactly happened this morning?" "A police officer named Martinez just spent an hour testifying under oath about how he heroically subdued a dangerous criminal who was trespassing on courthouse property." Keisha's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it that Chief Judge Carter had never heard before. "And?" "The dangerous criminal was me, Margaret. On my way to work, he didn't just arrest me. He assaulted me in front of this courthouse, called me a filthy animal, and told me I belonged in a cage." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "Jesus Christ, Keisha. What do you need? Should I call the FBI? The Attorney General's office?" "Not yet. Right now, I need those surveillance recordings secured, and I need you to make some phone calls. I want every case Officer Martinez has testified in over the past 5 years pulled and reviewed, every single one." "Consider it done. But Keisha, you can't handle this case yourself. There's a conflict of interest and—" "Margaret, in about 10 minutes I'm going to walk back into that courtroom wearing my judicial robes. Officer Martinez is going to learn exactly who he assaulted this morning, and more importantly, who has the power to ensure he faces the consequences of his actions." Henderson returned, carrying a garment bag and a small wooden box. "Your robes, Your Honor." "Robes, and your gavel." Keisha stood and unzipped the garment bag, revealing the flowing black judicial robes that had been her armor for over 2 decades. As she slipped them on, she felt the transformation begin. The fabric settled on her shoulders like a mantle of authority, each fold a reminder of the power she wielded, the oaths she had taken, the justice she was sworn to protect. She opened the wooden box and lifted out her ceremonial gavel, its weight familiar and comforting in her hand. Engraved on its handle were the words, "Justice is blind, but she sees all." "Henderson," she said, adjusting her robes, "when we return to that courtroom, I want you to announce to me properly." "Yes, Your Honor. How would you like to be announced?" Keisha Williams straightened to her full height, every inch the federal judge she had been for the past 23 years. "The Honorable Judge Keisha Williams, presiding." She looked at herself in the small mirror on the wall. The bruise on her cheek was still visible, but now it served a different purpose. It wasn't just evidence of Martinez's brutality. It was a symbol of how far the system had fallen, and how completely it was about to be restored. When court resumes, Officer Martinez will learn what justice really means. All rise! Henderson's voice boomed through the courtroom with an authority that made everyone snap to attention. But what happened next would be seared into their memories forever. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Keisha Williams presiding. The words hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Officer Martinez, who had been leaning casually against the prosecutor's table, went rigid. Judge Harrison, still seated in what he now realized was not his chair, turned pale as death. The prosecutor's mouth fell open. Keisha Williams entered through the judge's chamber door, wearing her full judicial robes, the gold trim catching the overhead lights. She moved with the measured pace of someone who had walked this path thousands of times before. In her right hand, she carried her ceremonial gavel. The silence was absolute. Not a single person dared to breathe. She took her place behind the bench, her bench, and sat down slowly, deliberately. Her eyes swept the courtroom, taking in every shocked face, every dropped jaw, every person who was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. "Officer Martinez," she said quietly, her voice carrying the full weight of judicial authority, "you may remain standing." Martinez looked like he was about to vomit. His face had gone from red to white to green in the span of 30 seconds. "Your Honor," Judge Harrison stammered, rising from his chair, we didn't, I mean to say—" "Judge Harrison," Keisha interrupted, her tone crisp but not unkind, "thank you for managing my courtroom during my unexpected delay. You may return to your own docket. I'll handle this matter from here." Harrison practically ran from the courtroom, his robes billowing behind him like he was being chased by demons. Keisha turned her attention back to Martinez, who was now visibly shaking. "Officer Martinez, approximately 2 hours ago, you testified under oath in this courtroom. Do you recall your testimony?" I... Martinez couldn't form words. "Let me refresh your memory," Keisha continued. "You stated, and I quote, 'These people always claim to be lawyers, judges, senators, anything to avoid accountability.' Do you remember saying that?" Martinez nodded weakly. "You also stated that I was quoted, 'another entitled activist looking for a payday,' and that you had seen a quote, 'this playbook before.' Is that accurate?" The courtroom was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning sounded like a roar. "And perhaps, most memorably," Keisha's voice grew colder, "you stated that people like me need to learn that, quote, 'actions have consequences.' Do you recall that particular piece of wisdom?" Martinez's legs were shaking so hard he could barely stand. Keisha reached under her bench and pulled out a tablet computer. "Officer Martinez, I'd like to show you some evidence that has just come to my attention." She turned the tablet screen toward the courtroom. On it was crystal-clear security camera footage from the courthouse steps, showing the entire morning's incident from multiple angles. "This is footage from courthouse security camera number 7, which has an unobstructed view of the main entrance." Her finger touched the screen, starting the video. The courtroom watched in horror as the events unfolded on screen. There was Keisha, walking calmly toward the courthouse in her civilian clothes. There was Martinez, blocking her path. And then, another ghetto rat trying to sneak in. Martinez's voice, clear as day, filled the courtroom through the tablet's speakers. Several people gasped audibly. The video continued, showing Martinez's unprovoked assault in vivid detail. The slap that snapped Keisha's head sideways, the brutal grab to her throat, the handcuffs. But the most damning moment was yet to come. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses." Martinez's own words, spoken with such venom and hatred, echoed through his courtroom. Several jurors in other cases who had been waiting in the gallery stood up and walked out in disgust. "Officer Martinez," Keisha said, pausing the video, "do you see any verbal aggression from the defendant in this footage? Any profanity? Any threats?" Martinez remained silent, his career disintegrating before his eyes. "Now," Keisha continued, "let's examine your claim that your body cam malfunctioned." She swiped to a new video file. "This is backup footage from your own body cam, automatically uploaded to the county's cloud storage system every 60 seconds, a system you apparently forgot existed." The new video began playing, and Martinez's voice filled the courtroom again, but this time it was even worse. This was the complete, unedited version. "Look at this uppity bitch thinking she can just walk into my courthouse," Martinez's voice snarled through the speakers. "These people need to learn their place. Time to teach another lesson." The prosecutor, Sandra Walsh, was frantically gathering her papers, trying to distance herself from the catastrophe unfolding before her. But Keisha wasn't finished. "Officer Rodriguez, Officer Thompson," she called out, "you both testified under oath that Officer Martinez handled the situation with remarkable professionalism. Would you like to revise those statements?" Both officers were already edging toward the exit. "And here," Keisha said, advancing the video to show Martinez's assault from his own body cam perspective, "we can see the moment when Officer Martinez committed felony assault against a federal judge." She let those words hang in the air for a moment. Federal judge. Martinez's knees buckled. He grabbed onto the prosecutor's table to keep from falling. "But wait," Keisha said, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone. "There's more." She pulled up a new file on her tablet. "This is audio from Officer Thompson's body cam, which was apparently functioning perfectly this morning." A new voice filled the courtroom. Thompson's voice, speaking to Rodriguez while Martinez was assaulting Keisha. "Dude's really going off on this one. Think she's actually somebody important like she keeps saying?" Rodriguez's voice responded, "Nah, man, look at her. Martinez knows what he's doing. Probably just another welfare queen trying to scam the system." More laughter from the officers as they watched their colleague brutalize a federal judge. The few remaining spectators in the gallery were staring at Martinez with undisguised revulsion. "Officer Martinez," Keisha said, setting down her tablet, "you asked me earlier if I had any employment verification. Well, I do." She gestured to the judicial seal mounted on the wall behind her bench, then to her nameplate, then to the oil painting of her that hung in the courthouse lobby. "I've been the presiding judge of this courthouse for 23 years, Officer Martinez. Every case you've ever testified in, every warrant you've ever requested, every search you've ever conducted in this jurisdiction has been under my authority." Martinez finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Your Honor, I didn't know." "You didn't know," Keisha repeated slowly. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to look. You saw a black woman and you made assumptions. You saw someone you thought was powerless, and you decided to abuse that power." She leaned forward slightly. "But Officer Martinez, there's something else you didn't know." The courtroom held its breath. "For the past 6 months, I've been conducting an investigation into patterns of misconduct and racial bias in this police department, working directly with the FBI's Civil Rights Division." Martinez's face went completely white. "This morning's incident wasn't random, Officer Martinez. You've been under investigation, and you just provided us with the most perfect evidence we could have hoped for." She lifted her gavel and held it in front of her. "Officer Martinez, you said actions have consequences. You were right about that. Court will recess while I consider the appropriate charges." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Martinez collapsed into a chair, his career, his reputation, and quite possibly his freedom now hanging by a thread. When court resumed 20 minutes later, the atmosphere had completely transformed. Word had spread throughout the courthouse like wildfire. Lawyers, clerks, bailiffs, and court reporters had quietly filed into the gallery, drawn by whispers of the most spectacular courtroom reversal in the building's history. Martinez sat slumped in what was now clearly the defendant's chair, his uniform wrinkled, his face ashen. His attorney, a nervous public defender named Michael Carter, who had been hastily summoned, kept shooting worried glances at his client. Judge Keisha Williams returned to her bench with the same measured dignity she had displayed thousands of times before, but now every eye in the room saw her differently. This wasn't just any judge. This was the woman who had been brutally assaulted by the man now trembling before her bench. "Officer Martinez," she began, her voice carrying the full weight of 23 years of judicial authority, "before we proceed with the serious criminal charges you now face, I believe this court and everyone present deserves to understand exactly who you assaulted this morning." She stood, moving around the bench to address the packed courtroom directly. "My name is Judge Keisha Williams. I have served as the presiding judge of this courthouse for 23 years. I was appointed to this position by Governor Richardson in 2001, and I was confirmed by the state Senate with a unanimous vote." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law School, where I was editor of the Harvard Law Review. Before my appointment to the bench, I served for 8 years as a federal prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice." Martinez's attorney was frantically scribbling notes, probably calculating how many years his client was facing. "During my tenure as a federal prosecutor, I specialized in cases involving police misconduct, civil rights violations, and institutional racism. I successfully prosecuted 47 cases against law enforcement officers who abused their authority." She paused, letting that number sink in. "In my 23 years on this bench, I have presided over more than 15,000 cases. I have sentenced hundreds of defendants, from petty thieves to murderers. I have seen every type of criminal behavior, every excuse, every justification." Judge Williams walked closer to where Martinez sat cowering. "But in all my years of service, Officer Martinez, I have never, not once, encountered such a perfect example of everything that is wrong with policing in America." The packed courtroom was silent except for the sound of Martinez's labored breathing. "You see, Officer Martinez, when you called me a ghetto rat and a filthy animal, when you told me I belonged in a cage, when you slammed me against the wall of my own courthouse, you weren't just assaulting a random citizen." She returned to her position behind the bench. "You were assaulting the person who has dedicated her entire career to ensuring that officers like you are held accountable for their actions." Judge Williams opened a thick file that had been placed on her bench. "This file contains detailed records of every case you've testified in over the past 5 years. 43 cases, Officer Martinez. 43 times you've stood in my courtroom and sworn to tell the truth." She flipped through several pages. 28 of those cases involved defendants who were people of color. In 26 of those cases, you were the arresting officer. And in every single one, Officer Martinez, you described the defendants using remarkably similar language to what you used with me this morning." Martinez's face had gone from white to gray. "Acting erratically. Refusing to comply. Becoming aggressive. Threatening officer safety. The same words, the same narrative, the same lies over and over again." Judge Williams closed the file with a sharp snap. "But here's what you didn't know, Officer Martinez. For the past 6 months, I've been working with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, the State Attorney General's Office, and the Department of Justice to investigate systemic patterns of racial bias and misconduct in this police department." The public defender stopped writing and simply stared at his client with something approaching pity. "Your name, Officer Martinez, appears on a federal watch list. You have been under surveillance. Your communications have been monitored. Your arrest patterns have been analyzed." She leaned forward slightly. "And this morning, Officer Martinez, you provided us with the most perfect, unambiguous, undeniable evidence of criminal civil rights violations that any prosecutor could hope for." Judge Williams lifted her gavel. "You assaulted a federal judge while she was performing her official duties. You did so based explicitly on racial animus, as evidenced by your own recorded statements. You then committed perjury when you lied under oath about the circumstances of that assault. The gavel hovered in the air. Officer Martinez, you asked me this morning if I knew my place. Well, let me tell you exactly what my place is. Her voice filled the courtroom with quiet authority. My place is on this bench in this courtroom, ensuring that justice is served. My place is holding people like you accountable when you abuse the power we've entrusted to you. The gavel came down once. My place, Officer Martinez, is making sure that what you did to me this morning is the last act of racial violence you will ever commit as a police officer. Martinez finally understood. He hadn't just assaulted a random woman. He had assaulted justice itself. And justice was about to hit back. Officer Martinez, Judge Williams began, opening a thick manila folder. Let's examine your distinguished career in law enforcement, shall we? Martinez's attorney leaned over to whisper urgently in his client's ear, but Martinez seemed paralyzed, unable to respond to anything happening around him. According to records from Internal Affairs, you've been the subject of 47 formal complaints during your 15-year career. 47 complaints, Officer Martinez. That averages to more than 3 complaints per year. She pulled out a document and held it up. Let's start with complaint number 1, filed in 2009. Mrs. Rosa Delgado, a 63-year-old grandmother, alleged that you called her a spick during a routine traffic stop and slammed her face into her car hood when she asked for your badge number. The packed courtroom stirred uneasily. Your department's investigation concluded that Mrs. Delgado's allegations were unsubstantiated. Interesting, considering we now have video evidence of you using remarkably similar language and tactics. Judge Williams flipped to another page. Complaint number 12, 2012. Jamal Washington, a 17-year-old honor student, alleged that you planted drugs in his backpack after he refused to provide information about his older brother. Once again, your department found the complaint unsubstantiated. Martinez's breathing was becoming more labored with each revelation. Complaint number 23, 2016. Dr. Michael Johnson. Yes, Dr. Johnson, a prominent cardiologist, alleged that you arrested him outside his own home because you didn't believe a black man could live in that neighborhood. Dr. Johnson spent 6 hours in jail before his attorney could secure his release. She looked directly at Martinez. What was the department's finding on that complaint, Officer Martinez? I don't... Martinez's voice was barely audible. Unsubstantiated, Judge Williams answered for him. Are you beginning to see a pattern here? Chief Judge Margaret Carter had quietly entered the courtroom and was now sitting in the front row, her expression grim as she took notes. But here's what's really interesting, Officer Martinez. I've cross-referenced your complaint record with your arrest statistics, and some fascinating patterns emerge. Judge Williams pulled out a large chart and placed it on an easel where everyone could see it. Over your 15-year career, you've made 107 arrests. Of those arrests, 1,089, that's 87%, involved people of color. In contrast, the demographics of your patrol area are 42% white, 31% Hispanic, and 27% black. She pointed to different sections of the chart with a laser pointer. Even more interesting, your use of force reports show that you used physical force in 63% of your arrests involving people of color, compared to only 12% of your arrests involving white suspects. Martinez's attorney was frantically writing, probably preparing an insanity defense. And here's perhaps the most damning statistic of all, Judge Williams continued. Of your 1,089 arrests of people of color, 432 cases were dismissed due to lack of evidence, prosecutorial misconduct, or violations of constitutional rights. That's a dismissal rate of nearly 40%. She turned back to Martinez. Officer Martinez, do you know what we call it when a police officer has a 40% dismissal rate due to constitutional violations? We call it a pattern of criminal behavior. The courtroom was deadly silent except for the scratch of reporters' pens on paper. But wait, there's more, Judge Williams said, her tone almost conversational now. I've also reviewed the financial impact of your career on the taxpayers of this county. She pulled out another document. Over the past 15 years, this county has paid out $2.3 million in settlements and judgments related to your conduct. $2.3 million, Officer Martinez. That's more than some small town's entire annual budgets. Martinez finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. Your Honor, I was just doing my job. Your job? Judge Williams interrupted. Officer Martinez, let me read you the oath you took when you became a police officer. She pulled out an official document and read aloud. I solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the state constitution, to bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and to faithfully and impartially discharge the duties of my office according to the best of my ability. So help me God. She set the document down. Faithfully and impartially, Officer Martinez, not selectively, not based on skin color, not based on your personal prejudices. Judge Williams walked around the bench again, addressing the entire courtroom. What we're seeing here isn't the behavior of one rogue officer. This is the inevitable result of a system that protects officers like Martinez, that dismisses complaint after complaint, that pays settlement after settlement, all while allowing the abuse to continue. She turned back to Martinez. But that system failed you today, didn't it, Officer Martinez? Because today, you chose to assault someone who had the power to expose everything. Martinez's head dropped into his hands. Officer Martinez, you spent this morning telling this court that people like me need to learn our place. Well, I think it's time you learned yours. Judge Williams returned to her bench and lifted her gavel. Your place, Officer Martinez, is in a defendant's chair, facing the full consequences of 15 years of criminal behavior. The gavel came down with finality. And that's exactly where you're going to stay. Judge Williams stood behind her bench, her judicial robes flowing around her like armor forged from justice itself. The packed courtroom held its collective breath as she prepared to deliver what everyone knew would be a historic verdict. Officer Martinez, she began, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of jurisprudence. Before I render judgment in this matter, I want to address not just you, but everyone in this courtroom and everyone who will hear about what happened here today. She gestured to the gallery, packed with lawyers, court staff, reporters, and citizens who had heard whispers of the extraordinary proceedings. This morning began with a simple question. What happens when someone with a badge believes they are above the law? What happens when years of unchecked power and systemic protection create a person who thinks they can assault a federal judge and face no consequences? Martinez sat slumped in his chair, his career and life crumbling around him in real time. The answer, Officer Martinez, is standing before you right now. Judge Williams picked up her gavel, the same one that had been engraved with the words, "Justice is blind, but she sees all," on the day she took her oath of office. For 15 years, you have terrorized this community. For 15 years, you have violated the constitutional rights of citizens whose only crime was existing while black or brown. For 15 years, you have made a mockery of the badge you were sworn to honor. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate as she continued. But your greatest mistake, Officer Martinez, wasn't any single act of brutality. Your greatest mistake was believing that the system would always protect you, no matter how far you went, no matter how many lives you destroyed. Martinez finally looked up, his eyes red and defeated. This morning, when you called me a filthy animal and told me I belonged in a cage, when you slammed me against the wall of my own courthouse, when you handcuffed me and paraded me through these halls like a criminal, you thought you were asserting your dominance over just another powerless victim. Judge Williams leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone in the packed courtroom to strain to hear her words. But I was never powerless, Officer Martinez, and neither were any of the people you've brutalized over the years. The only difference is that today, justice finally had a witness. She straightened to her full height. Officer Martinez, based on the evidence presented in this courtroom, evidence that came from your own mouth, your own actions, your own camera, I find you guilty of assault in the first degree, a felony. The words hit the courtroom like thunder. I find you guilty of assault on a judicial officer, a federal felony carrying a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years. Martinez's attorney closed his eyes and put his head in his hands. I find you guilty of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, a federal felony punishable by up to 10 years in prison. With each pronouncement, Martinez seemed to shrink further into his chair. And I find you guilty of perjury in the first degree for your false testimony given under oath in this very courtroom. Judge Williams paused, letting the weight of those charges settle over the room. But Officer Martinez, this case was never really about you. You are simply a symptom of a much larger disease that has infected our justice system for far too long. She turned to address the packed gallery. For too long, we have allowed police officers to operate with impunity. For too long, we have dismissed complaints, ignored evidence, and paid settlements while allowing the abuse to continue. For too long, we have told victims of police brutality that their experiences don't matter, that their word doesn't count, that justice isn't for them. Her voice rose with passion. But that ends today. What happened in this courtroom today proves that no one is above the law. Not police officers, not prosecutors, not judges, not politicians, no one. Martinez suddenly broke down completely, his body shaking with sobs that echoed through the silent courtroom. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never meant. Judge Williams looked down at him with something that might have been pity. Officer Martinez, your apology is 15 years and 47 complaints too late. Your remorse is only appearing now because you finally got caught by someone with the power to hold you accountable. She lifted her gavel high above her head. But here's what I want you to understand. In your final moments as a free man, every person you brutalized over the years deserved the same justice I'm delivering today. Every grandmother you called a slur, every teenager you planted drugs on, every doctor you arrested for living in the wrong neighborhood, they all deserve to see you held accountable. The gavel hovered in the air. Today, I'm not just delivering justice for myself. I'm delivering justice for every person whose complaints were dismissed as unsubstantiated. I'm delivering justice for every family who had to watch their loved one get brutalized while the system looked the other way. Her voice filled every corner of the courtroom. Officer Martinez, you told me this morning to know my place. Well, let me tell you what my place is. My place is ensuring that bullies like you can never again hide behind a badge while destroying innocent lives. The gavel came down with a sound like the crack of thunder. Officer Martinez, you are hereby sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed by law. You will serve 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Martinez collapsed completely, his sobs now uncontrollable. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, I am ordering a federal investigation into every case you have touched, every arrest you have made, and every complaint that has been filed against you. The victims you have silenced for 15 years will finally have their day in court. She set down her gavel and looked out over the packed courtroom. Let this be a message to every police officer, every prosecutor, every official who thinks they can abuse their power without consequences. Justice may be blind, but she sees everything. And eventually, she comes for everyone. The courtroom erupted in applause that lasted for 5 full minutes. Justice had finally been served. 6 months later, the ripple effects of that historic morning continued to transform the entire justice system. Officer Martinez was serving his 25-year sentence in federal prison, where his fellow inmates had learned about his crimes through news coverage. His badge, his pension, his freedom, all gone. The man who once terrorized an entire community now spent his days in protective custody, finally understanding what it felt like to be powerless. But Martinez's downfall was just the beginning. The federal investigation Judge Williams ordered uncovered a web of corruption that reached deep into the police department's command structure. 12 officers were terminated. 4 supervisors were criminally charged. The entire department was placed under federal oversight. Chief Judge Margaret Carter established new protocols requiring automatic federal review of any case involving allegations of police misconduct against judicial personnel. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers, with backup systems that could never be malfunctioned away. Most importantly, the 432 cases Martinez had tainted were reopened. Dozens of wrongfully convicted defendants were released from prison. Hundreds more had their charges dropped or sentences reduced. The county paid out an additional $8.7 million in compensation to Martinez's victims, money that came directly from the police department's budget. Judge Williams herself became a national symbol of judicial integrity and courage. She was invited to speak at law schools across the country, sharing the story of how one moment of violence revealed decades of systematic abuse. Her message was always the same. Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice delivered is justice for all. The courthouse where it all happened was renamed the Justice Williams Federal Courthouse in her honor. A bronze plaque near the entrance commemorates the morning that changed everything, with a simple inscription, "Here, justice finally found its voice." But perhaps the most powerful change was in the community itself. Citizens who had spent years afraid to report police misconduct began coming forward. Community oversight boards were established. Police training programs were completely overhauled, with Judge Williams personally designing curricula on constitutional rights and unconscious bias. The young law clerk who had witnessed the proceedings that day, inspired by Judge Williams's courage, decided to specialize in civil rights law. She now works for the ACLU, fighting similar battles in courtrooms across the nation. Rodriguez and Thompson, the officers who had supported Martinez's lies, were terminated and faced federal charges for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Their recorded laughter while watching a federal judge being brutalized became evidence in a case study taught at police academies nationwide as an example of institutional corruption. The video of Judge Williams delivering her verdict became the most watched courtroom footage in internet history, viewed more than 50 million times. Comments poured in from around the world, from people who had experienced similar injustices but never seen accountability delivered so completely, so publicly, so perfectly. Today, Officer Martinez sits in his prison cell, probably thinking about the moment he chose to assault a woman because he thought she was powerless. He thought he knew his place in the world. He thought he knew hers. He was wrong about both. Because sometimes justice doesn't just wear a blindfold. Sometimes justice wears judicial robes. Sometimes justice carries a gavel. And sometimes, when the moment is right, justice hits back. Never underestimate the power of standing up to bullies. Share this story if you believe everyone deserves justice, regardless of who they are or what they look like. Hit that like button if you want to see more stories of courage triumphing over corruption. And subscribe, because justice stories like this happen every day, and everyone deserves to see them. Your story could be next. Truth always finds a way.